50 years ago, in 1971, advertising executive Roger Hargreaves' life was changed forever by a question asked by his 8-year-old son, Adam. The question asked by his son at the breakfast table was this: "Daddy, what does a tickle look like?" Roger's initial response was one of amusement, but being quite a creative man, it got him thinking, and so Mr. Tickle was born. Mr. Tickle would become the first in the series of the Mr. Men books, going on to sell 1 million copies within the first 3 years. Roger Hargreaves was born on the 9th of May 1935 in the West Yorkshire town of Cleckheaton, and from an early age he drew cartoons and had a natural talent for drawing. After leaving school, Roger started work as a copywriter in advertising. He wrote adverts for everything from chocolate to cars. But when he got married and the couple started to have children, Roger had a dream to write and illustrate books for children. And his son's innocent question started off a whole new world of imagination. Mr. Tickle would soon be joined by Mr. Greedy, Mr. Happy, Mr. Nosy, Mr. Sneezy and Mr. Bump, who featured in the first Mr. Men books. Success came rapidly and it brought additional outings for the Mr. Men. A number of the books were brought to life by the BBC and narrated by Dad's Army actor Arthur Lowe, Mr. Mannering. Roger produced a number of comic strips which were to be published by the Mirror newspaper and the Daily Mail. In 1979, the Mr. Men had their first record in the pop charts with Mr. Men songs released on BBC Records. In 1981, the first Little Miss books were published, including Little Miss Bossy, Little Miss Naughty and Little Miss Sunshine. In 1984, Little Miss Twins was published based on Roger's twin daughters, Amelia and Sophie. Tragically, in 1988, Roger died and his son Adam took over the business, but the characters continued to be produced. In 2016, the Royal Mail issued a special set of stamps to celebrate 45 years of Mr. Men and Little Miss. Now, 50 years later, Adam Hargreaves, son of creator Roger, has designed a commemorative coin collection which was launched by the Royal Mint to celebrate the milestone anniversary of fun with some of the iconic characters for the next generation. The collection features Mr. Happy, Little Miss Sunshine and Little Miss Giggles with Mr. Strong on a £5 crown. Brilliant uncirculated versions of the coins feature the latest colour printing techniques showcased in the characters in vivid colour. And also, this year, for the very first time ever, the general public are able to decide the next characters to be turned into classic Mr. Men or Little Miss books. Just take a look at the new characters which are shown in the picture. The 5 new characters will each have a new, unique personality, just like you. But which one is yours? When you look at them, what kind of character can you see in them? What would you call them? Do you think you would be like any one of them? Or maybe you can already identify with one of the existing ones. Little Miss Happy, Mr. Bump, Mr. Messy, Little Miss Busy. Unfortunately, they've already written one about Mr. Grumpy, so I can't use that one. Each book in the original Mr. Men and Little Miss series introduced a different title character and his or her single dominant personality trait to convey a simple moral lesson. The Mr. Men and Little Miss characters frequently also reappeared in the other characters' books as well. And a total of over 85 Mr. Men and Little Miss characters have been featured in the series. The book's simple stories with brightly coloured, boldly drawn illustrations made them very popular, with sales of over 100 million worldwide across 28 countries. All the characters are from the fictional town of Mr. Land. And did you know that each book contains a title page, 16 to 18 text pages and 15 to 17 colour illustrations, all drawn with a magic marker? And where the name of the title Mr. Men character is too long to fit on the cover horizontally, instead of being in a reduced font size, it curves down at the end. And the books are all paperback with dimensions of 14 centimetres by 12.6 centimetres. And if all the books of each series are put together in order, the words My Mr. Men Library or My Little Miss Library can be read across the spines. And an illustration of Walter the Worm for Mr. Men, or a flower, Little Miss, can also be seen. And there can't be many families who've lived without a few Mr. Men books at home, who've spent a bit of time immersed in that funny and colourful and charming world. With simple stories and satisfying endings, the world created by Roger Hargreaves feels like an essential part of popular culture today. But did you know that the Bible also has some Mr. Men and Little Miss stories as well? So here's a quiz for you. I'm going to show you 3 characters and see if you know who they are and where they might be found in the Bible. I'm only going to show 3 characters, but there are lots you can find in the Bible. Why not email me using the address at the end of the video with your suggestions of Mr. Men and Little Miss characters you can see in the Bible? That'll be good. Are you ready to have your Mr. Men knowledge checked out? Okay, here's number 1. This one's a real favourite. Can you name him? Is it Mr. Strong, Mr. Chatterbox, or Mr. Greedy? It's Mr. Greedy. And Jesus told a story of a very rich farmer who had a terrific harvest one year, and he had more than he could ever need. He couldn't work out what to do about the situation, and then came up with the idea of pulling down his old barns and building new, bigger ones. But that night, God spoke to him and said, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? So beware, don't be greedy for what you don't have." Real life is not measured by how much you own. Real life is actually measured by the impact you have on other people while you are still here. So, are you ready for another one? Who's this? Is it Little Miss Bossy, Little Miss Angry, or Little Miss Busy? Well, it's actually Little Miss Busy. And can you remember the story of the 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, when Jesus came to visit their town? Martha was so busy preparing everything, and Mary was sitting listening to what Jesus was saying. Martha got angry and asked Jesus to tell her sister off and make her come and help. And Jesus shared with Martha the fact that at times we need to slow down and listen to what God is trying to say to us. And finally, who is this character? Is it Mr. Happy, Mr. Small, or Mr. Funny? Well done if you have worked out that it was actually Mr. Small. I particularly like the story of Mr. Small because it's one of those Mr. Men books where he has an encounter with something, or in this case, someone, and he becomes a changed Mr. Man. He starts to live differently. He is transformed. He is a changed Mr. Man. And the Bible speaks of a small man named Zacchaeus who wanted to see Jesus, but was so small he couldn't see over the top of the crowd. So he climbed up a tree, thinking Jesus would not see him. Jesus actually stopped at the bottom of the tree and spoke to him. And Jesus then went back with Zacchaeus to his house. And following that encounter, Zacchaeus became a completely changed person. And I can relate to Mr. Small, as I'm not very tall myself, and I too had an encounter with Jesus when I was younger, which changed the course of my life also. Much for the better, I have to say. So well done if you got all 3 of them right. It is odd, though, that the Mr. Men and Little Miss characters are all one-dimensional. They only have one characteristic, whether good or bad. But we're not like that, are we? We're a complete mix of all sorts of character traits and emotions. Could we really characterise you with just one name? And I'm so glad that God understands that we are complex beings. He knows all about us, and yet he still loves us. He loves us enough to send his own son Jesus into the world to live like us and to experience all our emotions and circumstances. And because of this, he knows every little part of our character, and because he does, he is able to change our lives to be the best we can be. Jesus said this, "I have come in order that you might have life, life in all its fullness." So don't be a Mr. Silly and ignore God, because that would be a real waste of your life. But be a Mr. Happy instead. Think about how your life can be enriched if you restore your relationship with God through believing in Jesus. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all again soon. God bless you all. Bye-bye.